If you're just tuning in for the first time ever, maybe, well, we've got some great off-season content. Mick and I, about a month ago, broke down all of the top transfers. We went through our top 20 and brought them a couple of newer names that maybe not a lot of people knew about. But of course, there was some huge Big Ten movement. So go ahead and check that out over on our YouTube. Also, all of our episodes are now available via podcast. So if you listen to Spotify or Apple, I've transcribed and exported all of our video episodes over to the Spotify or Apple or any podcast format. So you can go ahead and listen to that while you're driving in the car. You know what, Mick? I was really lucky enough to be joined by 6 fantastic coaches at the Big Ten Volleyball Media Days. Split that up into 2 different episodes. We had the ladies bunch with Leah Johnson, Jen Flynn Oldenburg, and Aaron Virtue. That was a crack up. And then a little bit more of the analytic guys crew with Kelly Sheffield, Keegan Cook, and Adam Hughes. So if you haven't checked out those videos or podcasts, go ahead and listen to those. But Mick, everybody's here for one thing, and that is the top 25 leading up into this very highly anticipated season. But when we recorded our transfer episode, Mick, not 2 hours after we finished recording, the big news came. So we've got to touch on this. No more Saturday championship match. Instead, it will be on Sunday, midday on ABC, prime time, end of December, December 18th. It's going to be a fantastic weekend leading up. Down in Tampa, they've got a fun little weekend of tournament action style this upcoming week. One we'll talk about, but Mick, what was the first reaction you had to the news that will be on ABC and it'll be on Sunday, so an extra day of rest?
It's about time. That was my reaction.
So you like it? You don't mind the extra? Actually, it'll be the 17th, not the 18th. Excuse me on that. But you don't mind the extra day of rest by any means, right? By having the Final Four, the semifinal on Thursday.
There is some anxiety for the players, especially at the end of the year with final exams and all of that. That's the one thing about the sport of women's volleyball. Almost always plays their national championship at the same time as the final exams at their institution. So it's a pretty challenging time. It might work to their advantage. They get to study a little bit more. They might be finished with their tests by then. We don't know until we try it, but I think the country deserves to see the women's volleyball in prime time, don't you?
Certainly do. We're going to have 2 matches, depending on where you are location-wise. That'll be on Big Fox on October 29th. You'll have Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Michigan, Ohio State. So we are inundating our national TV boost from nothing to now 2 or 3 huge matches this season on the big 4 channels, right? Whether it be ABC, CBS, Fox, or NBC. But, we've got a lot to cover here. I do want to talk a little bit about some week 1 matchups we're excited for. I teased that Tampa weekend that's going to be between Penn State, Florida, and Georgia Tech. That's going to be a lot of fun. But Mick, before we finally give you guys this top 5 and the top 25, there were some massive conference realignment news in the last few weeks. And Mick, it's not rumors anymore. Things are locked in. Oregon and Washington are officially joining the Big Ten with USC and UCLA next season, 2024. So that is a massive shakeup. And with that, Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado are going to join the Big 12. So the Pac-12 is disintegrating between our eyes here as the Big 12 will bump up to 16 members. And I just want a little bit, we'll talk a ton over the next few weeks, but what were a little of your first reactions seeing the news of these 6 West Coast teams moving on east?
Well, I can't understand why they couldn't get a deal going. I don't know where the problem was, and I've been reading a lot and calling around and talking. I really feel it's bad for the Olympic sports to lose the Pac-12. They've been our primary Olympic sport, a summer games sport producer, and with that conference now looking like it's going under, we're losing a heck of a lot. So I'm not sure what's going to happen here, and I'm not sure that the other schools want to split the money 18 ways or 16 ways or 20 ways, depending on how this ends up. So I don't think we're seeing the final rendition of how this is going to play out yet.
Still another shoe to drop on maybe adding a few more teams to what is still kind of sitting together as a 4 or 16 Big 12, excuse me, Pac-12 division setup, however they want to figure that out with those who are still sitting around. But I think, Mick, I think it came down to simply watching. I can't watch Pac-12. A lot of people my age or diehard sports fans or sports gamblers have not been able to watch the Pac-12 for our entire lives, pretty much. So I think that's got to have something to do with a little bit more than the competitive advantage that Oregon and Washington were missing out on. Now at least everyone can watch them, but no, there are way more downsides to having these softball players fly back at 3 a.m. from Rutgers to Seattle and then have to go to class the next day and then maybe have another midweek thrown in. But we'll get off our high horses here because it's been about 10 minutes and I'm trying so hard to keep the anticipation building, but let's go ahead and look at it now. We are going to start with our top 5. It is the AVCA Taraflex preseason top 25 poll. And Mick, I want to remind you, last season, Nebraska, they led the way. It was Nebraska, Texas, Wisconsin, Louisville, Minnesota as the top 25, the top 5. San Diego was number 25. Of course, we knew what our darling Toreros did, running all the way to the Final Four. So we will take this with a grain of salt and let us reveal to you our top 5 for 2023. Of course, leading the way with a colossal 44 first place votes, the defending champs, returning a few, O'Neal, Skinner, Phillips, and Akana, adding a few, and Jenna Wennis as well. But your Longhorns sit number 2 and Stanford 3. When you see these top 3, let's talk about just these 3. We've got orange, red, and red. Where does it sit for you in terms of your opinion?
Well, I think right now any one of the 3 can get there and win, but the team that's most experienced of the 3 is Stanford. They have almost all of their people back. They're very confident. They're going through the problems with Pac-12, but I don't think that's going to hurt their focus for the season. So I really put them as the team to beat. I think Texas is loaded. I think Wisconsin's loaded. I wouldn't have any trouble with having either of those 2 in first, but experience means a lot when you get in the tournament at it right now.
Yeah, I would say that Wisconsin also has A-list, star power lineup, loaded up with their 2 setters in Hamill and Ashburn, and of course adding in Carter Booth and Temi Thomas-Ilara. But Stanford, they didn't need to add much, right? Kevin Hambley's got an unbelievable amount of returning veterans. We'll dive deeper into Stanford as the weeks go on here. We don't want to spend too much time on any team. Louisville, then Nebraska, right? So Louisville, of course, reaches the national championship match, swept by Texas. Nebraska fell in the Sweet 16 against Oregon, but they are locked and loaded. A superstar addition in Merritt Beeson and a football stadium match lined up against Omaha that's got all of the volleyball world buzzing. I was at the Big Ten Media Days, and it was all Nebraska media, all excited to talk to Cook and excited to talk to Lexi Rodriguez, and they brought Beeson. So Nebraska, who was last season's preseason number 1, fell in the 3rd round. They sit number 5. And Mick, I want to hear a little bit about them, but let's show the 6 through 15 here just so we can keep this thing rolling with Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Penn State. 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10, rounded out with Oregon and Kentucky. Now, Penn State, right? A bit of a Cinderella run last season. Not a lot of expectations around Shoemaker Cawley's first year. They reached the Sweet 16. They take Wisconsin to 5 sets, and now they add Mac Pedraza and Jess Merzick. It'll be an interesting season for both Penn State and Minnesota as the Golden Gophers add a new head coach and libero in Kylie Murray.
I give Penn State the advantage here right now. Minnesota with new coach, Keegan Cook, they've got to get comfortable. They've got to figure all of these things out. I could see them struggle a little bit early, not live up to this ranking right away. But maybe by midseason, they get in midseason form, they can get back to this. But I do think Nebraska's got something to prove here. The problem they have is who's going to set, Daniel, who's going to set. And that's their leadership position. Like like the football team? Who's going to be the quarterback? So pretty interesting stuff to see what happens in the first 3 or 4 weeks.
How about Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh is a few, what do you want to call it? A few lucky bounces away from reaching the national championship. They had a bit of a surprising comeback in that match, a match that looked like it was going to be all Louisville. And then it was like, oh my goodness, here comes the Panthers. They reached the Final Four for the first time. They're sitting at 6. Oregon at 9, Kentucky at 10, some of these non-Big Ten teams that did make noise in the transfer portal. Oregon with a big addition of Ohio State's outside and Gabby Gonzalez. And, it's so early for us to really break down too much of the starting lineups or the star power. I really want to wait. So many years we've maybe exhausted the hot air by talking about expectations before the season starts. I want to kind of go over maybe a little bit more of the turnover from last year to this year. Kentucky swept by San Diego in the Sweet 16. They're going to have a unique situation. Mick, did you ever have to play your entire year in your basketball arena? Because that's what's going to happen with Coach Skinner. They're going to be playing in Rupp Arena this year. Kentucky sitting at 10.
I think they're going to like it. I think it's going to be a whole new possibility for Kentucky. The facility they played in is the old basketball arena. It was the old practice basketball facility. But sending that team into the #1 arena in town and everybody knowing where they're going to park, how they're going to walk in, where they're going to buy their popcorn. I mean, they're going to find out that they want to play here permanently. That's my thought on this. And they've got a whole new coaching staff. Skinner lost his assistant coach to Vanderbilt. They brought in a guy who's won 7 national championships in Canada as one of his assistant coaches in men's volleyball. Ben Josephson, one of the best coaches, I think, in the country. That coaching staff is loaded. Now we need to see how the team performs.
Memorial Coliseum, as hot as it gets when the weather is hot, as cold as it gets when the winter arrives. And I've been there in both September in 95 and December in 55. So I think you're on to something there, Mick, enjoying playing in some air conditioning early in the year. Kentucky is going to have another season, I think, picked #1 coming off of an SEC title, but the SEC's starting to get a little bit more of a heavyweight reputation. Of course, next season they'll have the 2022 champions in Texas, but this year we look at #11 in Florida. A Sweet 16 finish, a loss to Pittsburgh in 4 sets a season ago, but you lose Merritt Beeson. They still have one of the top setters in the country in Alexis Stuckey, the young underclassman. But I'm curious to see what my alma mater is going to bring to the table from a firepower perspective. And I think that kind of carries into a lot of these early teen numbers, right? 13 and 14 and 15 with San Diego, Ohio State, and Baylor. We really just don't quite know what the numbers are going to look like from a points per set perspective or from a one superstar outlook. San Diego only really returning Layla Blackwell. They dipped their toe into the transfer portal once again, but a lot of unknown names for both San Diego and Baylor. Meanwhile, Ohio State does have the firepower of Londot and Rader returning.
Yeah, and I heard they moved Londot to the left side over the spring, which would give her a lot more swings. Now, if she can be as productive she was on the right side, on the left side with more possibilities for scoring, they could pick up a lot of points. But I think Ohio State might be overranked at this point until they prove themselves. They've lost a lot of their potential here. Same way with Florida losing Beeson. Beeson is a beast. Let me tell you, she is one of the best players in the country. I can't think the national team is not parked on the back door there at Nebraska waiting for her to get out of Nebraska. I think she's a great player, and I don't know how Florida overcomes that. They're just going to be tough scoring points. And Baylor has now got to show that they can bring some top recruits in that will perform at the level of the national team players. They need to score points in a big way. They're well coached. They have good players, but they have to get some top kids now to lead them.
So, from Baylor into a name in Purdue where I think Purdue was a little bit in over their head in that match against Louisville, a second round loss. But the Boilermakers bring in a big name, and it was someone that was really buzzing around the Big Ten media days. They bolster a 1-2 punch with Eva Hudson, the reigning freshman of the year in the conference. They bring in a Nebraska native in Grace Heaney, who has a little bit of that Merritt Beeson flair to her. A lot of people are very high on the freshman out of Omaha and Heaney. So it'll be interesting to see. Purdue finish last season ranked 20th, second round loss to Louisville. Baylor also lost to Louisville in the Sweet 16. So that sits them at 15. Purdue starts our run of 16 through 25. So we could look at them now with BYU, a team that is new to the Big 12 conference, Mick. I think BYU is underranked in this. 17, they fell to Pittsburgh in the second round last year, but I think it was a weird season, a transfer season, a transition out of the West Coast Conference, now fully fledged. The Big 12 is not looking too scary, so it's certainly an option to see BYU finish in the second or third spot behind Texas. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I do think that this is a pivotal season for BYU to reestablish themselves as a top 8 team, like they had earlier. They've struggled the last 2 years to stay in position. They haven't been, well, their conference has been a three team conference for the most part. Marymount came on as the 4th team in that conference late, but BYU is now in a bigger conference. I want to see how they do. And jumping back to Purdue, I think they're underranked. I think the Shondell boys will have their team playing, and I think Hudson will be better this year. I gave Dave a little jab on Hudson trying to hit the ball through people instead of on the floor, but I was serious. I just think freshmen sometimes try to overpower things. She's got a world-class arm, and that kid can perform. And once they've had a spring with her and talked to her about using her power more effective, I think Purdue is underranked in the conference rankings and underranked on the top 20 poll.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Of course, I worked a little bit at Purdue, so the connection with the Shondells and Kat Jewell is strong, and I do believe that any season they have the size and a setter. And unfortunately, they lost Megan Rayner to an injury, a season-ending one. So they went and grabbed Jordan Poulter's younger sister from Denver, Lauren Poulter. So it'll be interesting to see. They'll be tested right away. Opening weekend against Creighton in Purdue. That should be a good one. Creighton sitting at 18. And Mick, we're going to swing back to the Big 12 here because Houston is ranked 19th. And of course, both BYU and Houston, additions to the Big 12 season this upcoming year with UCF as well. It's going to be a lot of travel for BYU, not that much travel for Houston. They add Mbono from Louisville. That's a big name and a big body for a Houston team that reached the Sweet 16 last season. They beat Auburn in 5 sets in round 2 before getting swept by Stanford. So, you know what? Houston and UCF are looking like they're going in different directions. Of course, Dagenet left UCF to go join the new pro league, but Houston is certainly stocks moving up right now in my mind.
Yeah, I think you circle them, you star them. They've added 5 transfers to go with almost everybody back from last year. It's a team that nobody's counting on or looking at, and they really have their schedule set up to play Texas at Houston. After Texas plays at Rice or West Virginia, they've got a road match where Houston's the last road match. It's just set up for Houston to really make some big things happening in the conference and for their team this year.
And so we could stick right there in Houston because there's going to be an opening weekend between 3 of these bottom 10 teams in the top 25, of course. Houston, USC, and Rice are all going to be mingling in this opening weekend. A really exciting one where USC will go to both Rice and Houston. Now, USC is an interesting name here because they're almost like the Yankees, right? Every single year, there's all this expectation and there's all these names and firepower. And once again, USC did not make the NCAA tournament last season. They are the only team in this preseason top 25 that did not make the field of 64, and the only team that finished unranked in the AVCA poll. So where do we sit? Give me your lowdown of your former stomping grounds out there.
Well, I'm excited for Coach Keller. I think he's been doing a very good job at rebuilding that program. But but he lost his best left side, transferred to Arizona in conference. So now he's going to have trouble scoring points again. And I'm surprised that the poll put him in the top 25. Knowing this, they must know something. The coaches must know something that we don't know yet. So he took the team to Brazil this spring. They played down there. I didn't hear the results, but I know they have talent. So I think this is their year. If they're going to do something, they have to break out this year, and they have to scare some people.
Well, of course, still Skylar Fields, Mia Tuaniga still setting out there. It'll be interesting, and
Hello, how are you?
you got one more season of the Pac-12. It is certainly going to be an awkward season in the Pac-12, and we could stay out there with Washington State, a team that is sitting in purgatory, but they've got a very, very talented roster, Mick. 21st in the preseason poll, a 4-set loss to, of course, the Final Four team in U San Diego last season for WSU. And Pia Timmer is going to be returning. Shea Rubright added as a middle from Minnesota. She adds a lot of size as well. And, of course, Magna Jelarova has been one of the most underrated players in all of college volleyball. She's back for a 5th season. I am going to go out on a limb here, Jurek and Radakovic. I think that Washington State will finish this season in the top 15. That's going to be like one of my bold predictions coming off the dome here. I think Washington State, with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that they weren't picked up by a conference right away. I think that's certainly a team that I'm going to keep my eyes peeled with. The rivals in Washington already headed towards the Big Ten. I'm not sure what you think about that, but let's round out this top 25. Rice, WKU, fittingly going back-to-back there with that big rivalry. And then Arkansas rounds out our 25.
Yeah, I actually have Washington State in the top 12. I'm right there with you. I think they're way better than anybody knows. This is a 5 or 6 year effort by the coaches at Washington State. They have got, I think, 6 or 7 foreign players on the Palouse, besides the kids that you talked about that they're bringing back. I think this is their year to break out, and they're tired of being stepped on and pushed around, and their athletic director's mad about the conference. The coaches want to prove, I mean, they've given them a good budget. They've allowed them to get out there and get after kids. Now this is their time to do it. I think they're ready, and I think they're loaded. I do think you're right. Their roster is one of the best. The last 3 you mentioned, Rice, when they lose that setter, we have to see what happens. It's like losing your quarterback now. Rice could be good again, or maybe not as good. Arkansas has been flirting with smaller left sides with good arms. They compete like everything. The coaches in the conference think he does the best job of developing talent of anybody, but they have got to start beating some people this year. And so Western Kentucky is always going to be Western Kentucky. Let's see who he found, who he's bringing in, and who he's going to nurture. Those are 3 teams we just have to watch. Good to put them on the poll, but they're well coached.
Yeah, and one extra note there, Washington State will be tested early on, traveling to Louisville, opening weekends. That'll be a good test. Rice and Western Kentucky, we just can't wait for them to play each other, right? Western Kentucky, yep. Paige Briggs returns, 2 of the best coached teams outside of the Power 5, no doubt about that. And Mick, you mentioned it, Arkansas, they started last season with 2 marquee wins in the non-conference, and then just kind of pillow fighted their way a little bit through some of the poor SEC play. And it's a really tough challenge when you're in a conference like that that's so top heavy. You've got to try to wake up for every single match. So we'll see what Arkansas can do in the 25 spot. Here's our receiving votes spot. And it's a unique one. Kansas is the 26th team. They come off of an NCAA tournament run for back-to-back years. They were the darlings a couple years ago. Remember Caroline Crawford and Mosier and company. And Tennessee is 27. They lost in the first round to Purdue. Washington and their new look, their new head coach, their new everything, they sit 28. They lost in the first round to TCU. And then Auburn. So a 4th SEC team in the top 30. They lost in the second round to Houston. And Mick, the only team that was ranked to finish last season that is not in the top 25 is UCF. and that's not too much of a surprise with Melville graduating, their all superstar, and then of course losing the head coach in Dagenais to sit right there. So Mick, I want to pull up the top 25 here for everybody and just give me one or two of your biggest surprises here as we round out the episode. We talked a little bit about Washington State, so aside from them, maybe give me one team that is criminally overrated or overranked on this poll.
Well, when I looked at the poll, and I can't see it from where I am right now, but when I looked at the poll, I just thought Ohio State was too high.
Okay.
They lost their whole starting team for the most part. Now you're right, Londot's back and that sort of thing. But I don't think they're a top 20 team until they prove they can be up there. Both the Ohio State, both the Big Ten coaches and the poll ranked Ohio State high, and I think that's because they like their coach. They think she's a top quality person and a great coach. They're giving her a lot of credit, but she's going to have to come out and beat some people before she needs to be up there. And I didn't hear Marquette's name anywhere. And
They're
they
12.
are.
Let me tell you, Marquette's at 12.
Yeah, that's a team that scares me. I don't know. They're playing the fastest offense of anybody out there. They have a system that really works for them as long as they have those kids there. And if he can replace people leaving with kids who can play that system, he's going to be a hard team to deal with. I don't think he's overrated. I think he's right in the hunt. But I put Washington State right up there with them and a couple of other teams.
I'll tell you what, Marquette would be a team that I would love to see in a big conference with all this realignment. Imagine moving Marquette and Creighton into the Big Ten. If you want to just keep the geography making sense there, I would really enjoy that from a volleyball perspective. Now, Mick, I've got to be harsh to them. I love them. I love Mary Wise. I think Florida is the team that is a little bit too high ranked. At 11, I just don't quite know what to expect from them, and we will see right away against Penn State in Tampa in that Final Four venue opening weekend. And as well, I'm very curious to see what Georgia Tech will bring to the table. They're number 20, but it definitely feels like they are far away from the top two spots of Pittsburgh and Louisville in the ACC. But that's our top 25. I do want to go over a few of the fun week one matchups. We talked about a few of them, but let me get a little rapid fire for you here. We won't have an episode next week. Mick is going to enjoy his vacation, and then we'll jump back with you right after opening weekend is in the books. But we've got our typical Big Ten, Big 12 challenge of sorts. Wisconsin, Baylor, and TCU will tangle in Minnesota. With Minnesota, that's going to be a lot of fun. BYU will take on Pittsburgh in Montana, Missoula, Montana. Those are great matchups. And then Texas has a good challenge. They head out to Southern California, taking on Long Beach State, and then they go straight to Minnesota for a weekend and then Tuesday turnaround. So those are three fun ones that we haven't discussed, as well as San Diego against Oregon in Hawaii. So a lot of fun opening weekend matchups for you, Mick.
Yeah, I think the coaches have done a good job on raising their pre-conference schedule expectations. They're getting out there and playing the teams, and for us fans, isn't that wonderful? We get to see some of the best matchups. But I'll tell you what, they're going to have a little bit more trouble. Last year's teams were 5- and 6-year teams. This year's team is maybe some 5-year players, but mostly 3- and 4-year players. You're going to find there's going to be a fatigue factor somewhere in the season, maybe middle of October, somewhere right in there. I think they'll all start out gangbusters, and we love to see this play. But I think they're going to have a little trouble maintaining the level that we saw last year that we really liked. And I will be very happy if I'm wrong about this. But that's just one of the things that I'm going to watch for as we get into this.
Well, I cannot wait to see the comments. I want you all to comment with who you think is the most underrated ranking, who you think is the biggest snub or the biggest overrated team, overranked team, we can call it. We won't call them overrated. But there's a chance right off the bat for Florida and Georgia Tech to prove me wrong, because they will be taking on Penn State in Tampa opening weekend. What weekend matchup are you guys most excited for? Please subscribe. Go ahead and rate us. And if you are into podcasts, we are moving so that all of our options, all of our episodes are going to be available on both of them in case there is a week where Mick and I can't jump on. Video-wise, we're going to start to try to transform this into a multi-stream platform so that we can bring you audio if that happens to be the case, or if we have an interview with a player that can only do audio. I'm just trying to think ahead. So those are a few of the changes. Those are a few of the additions. Here we are with a new season of Six Rotations. We're so excited. We're happy to be with you. Thanks so much for tuning in live. And for those that are watching recorded, lead up into this top 25 ranking, because we are just less than a week and a half, depending on when you're watching, away from our opening night of college volleyball. Follow us over on Twitter or X at Six Rotations. And as always, he's Mick, I'm Daniel, and this is Six Rotations.